For many students, the oral presentation is the scariest part of the English study design, and it's the first one. So yay! Doing a speech can be super daunting. Not only is the writing part only just one half of the equation, you have to present it in real time, which means that you can't go back and fix up your mistakes like you would in a writing SAC. But trust me, the oral presentation SAC can be one of the most dynamic and engaging tasks that you complete in VC English. And there are plenty of ways to make it more interesting and manageable for yourself. Trust me, because I've been there, and like I said in my previous video covering oral presentation topics for 2020, I was not a public speaker. I hated oral presentations, and I found myself getting full marks in my year 12 SAC. So if I can do it, I have full confidence in you. Today we'll be breaking down the oral presentation SAC into 3 parts and looking at how to tackle each of them. By the end of this video, you're going to feel empowered to go ahead and give it a go in your own terms. Part 1, choosing a good topic. Often for students, oral presentation is hard to begin with because you want to find a topic that you're interested in, and it needs to fulfill the criteria that has been in Australian media from the previous year's September 1st. If you have no idea where to start, don't worry. The first thing you should do is think about an event that's happened recently. It could be anything, as long as it's generated a variety of opinions and debates and has been recently covered in Australian media. But Lisa, why don't we just go to the issue straight away? Isn't doing this a waste of time? Well, here's a hypothetical to illustrate. If you asked me to name an issue, I'd probably come up with climate change, which is a super broad topic. However, if you asked me to recall an event, I'd recall the bushfires. Something that's much more concrete, which 1, has generated specific and passionate opinions in the media, and 2, can be linked to the wider issue of climate change. So, where do you find an event? If you can't think of anything particularly interesting straight away, you can always try Wikipedia. Seriously, I know you're probably laughing, but Wikipedia, very helpfully, has pages of specific things that happened in specific years in specific countries. So 2019 in Australia might well be a starting point. The ABC News Archive is also really helpful since you can pick dates or periods of time and see a good mix of news events from then. Now that we have an event in mind, we can look for an issue. This will be a specific debate that comes out of the event and can be framed as a whether or not question. The recent Australian bushfires, for example, might generate debate around whether or not the Australian government is doing enough to combat climate change, whether or not Scott Morrison has fulfilled his duties as Prime Minister, or whether or not it's appropriate to discuss policy already when people are still grieving. All of these issues are going to be more current and more focused than just the general topic of climate change. So pick one that resonates with your speech. If you'd like some inspiration on this department, then you check out my last week's video on current 2020 oral presentation topic ideas and the accompanying blog post for an easy to digest, comprehensive list of debates to choose from. From here, we need to develop our own opinion on the issue. Reading what other people are thinking and saying in opinion pieces and analysis articles is a fantastic way to see what you naturally agree with. And from there, you can develop and strengthen your own contention and arguments. So to recap step 1, first, find an event. Second, choose a specific debate around that selective event and associated issue. And third, develop your own opinion. Pretty simple now, huh? Part 2, writing a good speech. For this part of the task, the study design reminds us of 2 things we need to do. Use sound argument and persuasive language. To be fair, persuasive writing mightn't be something that you think about specifically whilst writing. However, it's good to have in mind a general register for your speech before you start. This refers to, in layman's terms, how your speech sounds and how your arguments are constructed. It's one of the first things you might analyze in a written essay for good reason. It's broad and it sets the tone for your arguments. With the bushfires, for instance, you might contend that even though grief is a strong emotion, it should also be a trigger for resolute, permanent policy reform. But we come from a frustrated, this is what we've been saying for ages register, or a compassionate, look at the damage that it's caused register, or an assertive, we need to bring the community first register. Maybe you can even incorporate a little bit of each, or maybe, probably, there are more options. But in any case, making this decision first will help you string together more arguments and incorporate more persuasive language techniques. For some more information on what registers would correspond with different language techniques, definitely check out Mark's accompanying blog post in the card above. Once you've decided on a register, you may consider adopting a persona. That is, a character and a context for your speech. You don't have to, but it might help you to get started and to put yourself in somebody's shoes who's been affected by this particular event. Now onto openings. These can be tricky. Try to avoid stating your event, issue, and contention outright. The audience doesn't need to know. Recently, Australia experienced a horrific bushfire season, and I'm going to talk to you about why now is the time to act on climate change. Boring. They'll figure that out. Instead, try something that clearly communicates your register and or persona, if you've got one. If you're a frustrated climate activist, start by illustrating the historical patterns of bushfires getting worse and worse. If you're a compassionate community builder, start with anecdotes of the damage. Don't worry if you feel like the issue won't be clear enough. Again, they'll figure it out. The opening also sets the bar for the formality of your speech. And honestly, it's up to you how formal you want to be. As a rule of thumb, don't be so formal that you don't use contractions such as you'll and can't. Avoid these definitely in essays, but they're a natural part of speaking, so it'll feel strange if you don't use them. Now that you've decided on your register, persona, and opening, it's time to draft and rehearse in front of others. I'd really recommend you highlighting areas in which you're weakest and asking them for specific advice on those sections at the end. Having specific questions to ask, like should I have more quantitative data in this section? Or is this specific appeal to X obvious enough? Also means that you'll get better feedback rather than just a generic, how did I go? Good, you went good. Part 3, delivering an engaging presentation. Most of you will probably find this part the most daunting part of the SAC. Honestly, me too. But this is the part with the most tried and tested tips for success. With regard to body language, stand with your feet shoulder width apart, and more importantly, don't move your legs. Especially if you're nervous, swaying or shuffling will be noticeable and it will make you seem more nervous. When you practice, pay attention to the lower part of your body and train it to stay still if possible. That being said, do use your arms for gestures. They're more natural and will help you engage with the audience, but don't overdo it either. Usually holding cue cards will free up the other, but stops you from going overboard. And cue cards brings us into another important consideration. Eye contact. Hold cue cards as high as you can without it being too uncomfortable. This means that you don't have to take your eyes away from the audience for too long or too noticeably to check your notes. Of course, knowing your speech really well means that you don't have to look at your cue cards as frequently. When I did my speech, I practically memorized it. Starting from a week before, I started memorizing one paragraph at a time, and I practiced that multiple times a day, 3 to 5 times a day, until I remembered each section of my oral presentation. This meant less reliance on my cue cards and more time actually focusing on that eye contact so that I could really persuade my audience. Further, when you rehearse, make sure you actually pretend that you are really doing the oral presentation. This means looking up ahead, holding cue cards in the right spot, and not just reading the cue cards, but actually speaking to an audience. The last point is really important. Tone variation might come naturally to some, but not others. I always found that practicing tone variations meant that I'd be able to deliver it more naturally when I was actually doing it in real life. Tone variation might mean emphasizing certain words, using pauses, or slowing down for effect, or modifying volume. Incorporating some of these elements, even writing them into your notes by bolding, italicizing, capitalizing your words will help you break out of that metonymy and make your speech more engaging as well. Be sure to emphasize things like emotive language and any evidence you might use to illustrate your arguments. And one last thing, don't speak too quickly. Easier said than done, but often the icing on the cake is a speech that's memorable for the right reasons. I hope that this video has given you some insight into how you can achieve an A+ in your oral presentation SAC. I've got heaps of resources for you to get started, more than get started actually, to really help you get started, get your topic, find your debate, and get started writing on it. If you feel like you'd like more of this advice and you found this helpful, then I'd highly encourage you go and check out my How to Write a Killer Oral Presentation. At risk of sounding like a broken record, I was somebody who did not think that I was an oral presentation queen at all, but I managed to get full marks when I was in year 12. And I know that if I can do it, you can too. If you have any questions about this oral presentation task, leave it down in the comment section below so I can help clarify things for you. I wanted to thank you, Mark, yet again for being our awesome content guru. He's just fantastic at creating the type of content I know will really help you guys. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!